Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the California Small Farm Conference. My name is Evan Wigg. I'm with Community Alliance with Family Farmers, and we are very excited to have you here this afternoon for a workshop titled Winter CSAs, a Climate Adaptation Strategy. We are very lucky to be joined by three wonderful farmers who will be telling you about their experience with Winter CSA. And I just want to encourage everybody to participate using the chat feature right at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little button there. That'll allow you to make comments, introduce yourself, share resources maybe that you have, as well as ask questions which the presenters will be able to get to throughout the course of today's workshop. Today's workshop is being recorded. And I just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors and, of course, to all of our presenters who are making this year's conference possible, including these lovely farmers here. And with that, I would like to pass it on. Thank you, Anna, Sarah, and Katie. Thanks so much for being here. I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Evan. Hello, everyone. Great to be with you. I can't actually see who all is in the room because I'm in presenter view, but I'm glad to be here with all of you. My name is Katie Hackmeyer. I own Red H Farm in Sebastopol, California, and I'm really excited to be joined by Anna and Sarah today, who are going to be sharing a bit later about their farm, Winter Sister Farm. All of us are here today to talk about farming during the climate crisis and winter CSAs as a potential adaptation strategy. So I've been doing some research on my farm for the past couple of years, funded by WSARE, Western Sustainable Ag Research and Education. If you are farmers and you're not aware of WSARE, I highly encourage you to check it out because it's a great resource for getting funding to do interesting research on your farm and have projects that otherwise might feel out of reach to really be thinking about get funding. It's amazing. I didn't actually really know about it until a few years ago, so highly recommend checking it out. Anna and Sarah, before I launch in, do you guys want to say hello or?
Hi. I think we can go over more once you're done. But yeah, cool. Hi everybody.
Right. Yeah. It's going to be very casual and conversational. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my background and talk a little bit about the farm and then some of my personal challenges with climate change and what's been happening over the last 5 years or so, and then kind of go through what my winter CSA transition has looked like and the different questions I've been looking at through my research. And then really stoked to hear from Sarah and Anna as well, who are going to be talking about their winter CSA. We're both a couple of winter CSA farmers in Northern California, and their model looks quite a bit different than mine. So I think it's going to give you guys a lot of great perspective. So my background, I'm not actually from a farming family. I grew up on about an acre of land in Sonoma County, had no intention of becoming a farmer. Graduated from college, did some internship work and in the small, actually with CAF and with another organization called Food First, and then felt like I needed to get some hands-on experience to continue doing this kind of advocacy. The recession hit, so kind of came of age there right during the recession and could not find a job. I realized I had access to an acre of land, and with the little experience that I had learning how to farm in Minnesota, which is not where I would have chosen to do my farm apprenticeship if I had known I was actually going to become a farmer, decided to start a production on the acre that I grew up on. So I'm gonna start sharing some slides now, and it might take a moment to get it settled. I was having some technical difficulties before here, so we'll just see if this works well. Can you guys see that? Great. Okay. So a little bit about the farm and the background of the farm. So I've been farming for the last 15 years. So I launched the farm in 2009 and took about a year and a half off somewhere in the middle there, or in the earlier years, but been farming for about 15 seasons. And the farm has been about 1.2 acres or so, split over 2 different pieces of land for the last 9 years. And then in the last year or so, I made a big transition and I stopped farming the secondary parcel that I've been farming and consolidated down to kind of my home farm, the piece of land that I grew up on. So the farm has gone through a big kind of land transition in the middle of transitioning to this winter CSA. It's a no-till production, so I don't use tractors. It's all hand scale labor. And I'm an agroecologist, so do a lot of work to build soil and increase biodiversity. Part of that also do a lot of educational work on the farm. So I teach agroecology at Sonoma State, and the farm is sometimes a little bit of a laboratory for that, particularly during COVID. And also do a lot of mentorship and apprenticeship with aspiring farmers and some with organizations, a program called Climate Farm School, an organization called Agroecology Commons. So do a lot of education and then also a lot of community organizing work. So co-direct an organization called Celebrating Women's Leadership in Food that launched back in 2016 at the farm. We hold a symposium every year and then some other events and things like that. I dropped the Instagram handle on the slide there. It's Women Leaders in Food. In case you're interested in that, we do kind of network and community building work across California with women and gender expansive people working in food. So all of that kind of found its home on the farm. And then Red H also historically has been half dry farm. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The home farm didn't used to have irrigation. And so the secondary plot was irrigated. The home farm was only used for early spring production and dry farmed crops. That changed a couple of years ago, but we still do quite a bit of dry farming. The farm was launched as a CSA back in 2009, and then I added a farmer's market and added some restaurants, took a year or so off, came back and ended up kind of shutting the CSA portion down, just working with farmers markets, sold at the Sebastopol Farmers Market and a few others over the years, and some restaurant sales. And then you know, for me, that was like a little bit less stressful than the CSA model, even though I felt that the CSA model was really kind of a great way, you know, kind of the most ideal way to really support diversified farmers and make sure that we have the community support and safety net that we need. But it was really, as a type A person, very stressful for me trying to fill those boxes every week. And so I just started focusing on farmers markets. So did a lot of like high rotation lettuces and brassicas and all the goodies that you have at kind of, you know, spring, summer and fall farmers markets and a little bit over the winter. And then over the last 5 years or so, I mean, probably really starting in 2017 with the fires that happened in Sonoma County, things just really started shifting for me. You know, having grown up in Sebastopol and being used to kind of the foggy, cool summers and, you know, with fog pretty regularly in the morning and sun in the afternoon, and starting the farm in that context and kind of watching that really change over the last several years. Like as I've spanned my farming career, I've watched and experienced the weather changing so drastically, and really have, you know, felt the impacts of the increasing temperatures and the heat, the smoke as well, obviously, but really kind of the temperatures that feel warmer and warmer as the years go on have started to become a big struggle for me. So I was starting to feel like pretty burned out and having a bit of a hard time with the heat and just not able to work in the same capacity. I mean, I'm almost 40. So also like, you know, starting the farm at 25 and going through that, you know, those first 10 years of like really powering through and working like absurd hours. And then these last 5 years, really just feeling that toll on my body and realizing that something really kind of needed to change. Then COVID hit. You know, I have the farm, I have some teaching work, and I have some community organizing work, and all of those jobs kind of got harder. I had to be flipped all around during COVID. And that was right at the same time I started thinking about shifting this model and thinking about whether or not I wanted to continue going to farmers markets and pushing so hard. You know, COVID wasn't like a tipping point necessarily, but it was just a time when I was already kind of thinking about changing things. And my farm assistant at the time actually kind of conceived of the Winter CSA model. Her name's Alana. She said, you know, what if you just farmed for the winter months or had a Winter CSA? And I was like, whoa, it just kind of blew my mind because I'd never thought of it. So that I started thinking about that, and even in 2021 or going into the 2021 season, I started planning to add a winter CSA to my model, continue going to farmers market, but try to think about a slow transition. And then I would say that my burnout really kind of hit its peak in 2021. With a catastrophic drought, I lost a ton of crops, all of my dry farmed field, tens of thousands of dollars. Just and the emotional toll of just watching things kind of struggle and fail and watching fields die and having no control over it. I really hit kind of an emotional wall. And I think that a lot of people, farmers are stoic and don't talk about it a lot, but I think it's really important that we talk about kind of the emotional strain that farming can take on our community. And oh, sorry, I'm having a funny phone situation happening. Sorry about that. Old phone started speaking. And so I really began thinking about changing the model in, moved into, sorry guys. Started growing for the Winter CSA in 2021, and then the catastrophic drought hit, and it was really challenging, just a really challenging time emotionally, a really challenging time ecologically. And I just started really feeling the impacts on my health. I think the emotional work, the emotional strain coupled with the physical pressure I'd been putting on myself really hit a max. And I realized, like, if I'm going to continue farming, I can't keep doing it this way. I can't keep pushing. I wasn't able to fully launch the Winter CSA in 2021 because I lost so many of the crops to the drought. And so I started really tiny with a really small 15-person Winter CSA in 2021. And then as I moved into 2022, started growing it in a bigger way. So now let's talk a little bit about the Winter CSA model and the 3 research objectives. So as I started transitioning to the Winter CSA, I talked about it in an article that I think I wrote for Civil Eats, and someone from WCR reached out to me and said, I think this would be a really great research project. And so it was really fantastic to kind of start making this transition to crops that are lower value crops and have a little bit of an economic subsidy in doing the research. And so I developed this research project with WCR, looking at 3 different things that were really critical to me, looking at whether or not the model itself, a Winter CSA model, growing lower value, longer term crops on a highly diversified, high labor farm was actually economically viable. Like, is this going to be an economically viable model? And really looking at that in comparison to myself, right? Like, every farm's context is so different. So my comparison is to, like, can I match the economics I've been, and I'm going to share those very transparently in a moment here. Can I match the economic model that I've had so far in this new Winter CSA model? Looking at whether or not there's actually a market for Winter CSAs in California. You get Winter CSAs on the East Coast, right? Like, you see that more on the East Coast. There are not a lot of farms that are just doing Winter CSAs on the West Coast. So I thought, is this even viable in a climate where people can kind of get fresh produce year round, and it's not as much of a, it might not feel as special to people, in a Winter CSA on the East Coast, you're like really investing in like root crops and storage crops, and like nothing, like fresh crops are not growing. And so you're like really, that's like a whole thing. And so it's just different in California. And then the third question that was kind of the biggest one for me was taking a look at farmer well-being. So can a shift in crop focus to long season storage and dry crops in a diversified system truly facilitate a reduction in fieldwork hours and physical labor during the increasingly hot months of summer and the expanded fire season? Is it a viable system for farmers facing climate extremes and weather extremes? And do the labor patterns feel more manageable? And, you'll see with me and Sarah and Anna that we have different systems, but there's an overall question, I think, that we were both looking at, like, can we create a labor system that works for us? Might be different labor systems, but can we create labor systems that work for us? So the kind of flow of, let's talk a little bit about the flow of the Winter CSA season and what the crops look like, and how that all kind of plays out. So in the in the spring, the flow looks like kind of a very busy spring, a more mild summer, and a very busy fall, and a more mild winter on my farm. So spring, like any other farm, is going to be filled with like greenhouse work and planting, getting land prepped, and getting all the crops out, because winter CSAs are still reliant on summer crops, right? Onions, shallots, winter squash, dry chilies. If you do any processing like tomatoes or strawberries for freezing or sauces, herbs, potatoes, dry beans, dry corn, all those things that get in the ground in the spring. And then there's a little bit of planting in the summer with some of those kind of July planted crops like celery, or like leeks and celery, parsnips, things like that, kind of things that are planted more like June, July. You're not in those summer months flipping beds and planting lettuce and trying to push arugula through the heat and like managing flea beetles and doing all of that work that is, can become so arduous in those summer months. In those summer months, you're gopher trapping, you're cultivating or managing weeds. You might be harvesting herbs for drying, and I do that on my farm. You're kind of there's a maintenance and a management, right, that's happening, but there's not necessarily the continued like really hard push that spring brings. And then in the fall, you have, a big harvest and all that fall planting that you'd have in kind of any other farm model. So you're harvesting all of those potatoes and winter squash, the shallots and onions, and you're putting them away in storage. I'll interrupt myself to say that storage and infrastructure is definitely a limiting factor in a CSA. I do not have proper storage and infrastructure, which has made it hard. I have very minimal, like bare bones. And so thinking about getting into farming, I think that infrastructure piece is different in a winter CSA. We can come back to that in the Q&A maybe. And then all that fall planting that has to happen, all the greens, the cooking greens, brassicas, things like that. And then as we move into late fall and winter, moving into October, all of the quick crop production that happens in hoop houses, like radishes and turnips and arugula and lettuce and things like that. So that's kind of what the crop makeup looks like on my farm, kind of here that you see here on the slide. Of course, garlic planting is also tucked in there in October. I think one of the most special things about the winter CSA is actually the story that you get to tell around how long some of these crops have been waiting, seeded and tended and waiting. And I think that people, and I'll love to hear what Sarah and Anna say about this. I think that people really start appreciating some of that a little bit more and understanding like what a commitment it is to grow winter crops. So here's kind of a breakdown. Let me go back. Sorry. Here's a breakdown of those seasons. So February, March, and early April, mostly greenhouse work. Late April through early June, really busy planting season. June, July, and August are a little bit calmer with some seeding and transplanting. Mid-August through early October is harvest season like it is everywhere. Late October, November, early December are calmer months, and then November through January on my farm are calm for 3/4 of the month, and then a bustling CSA harvest. So the other thing I should say about my CSA model specifically is that it's a monthly model. So people get a monthly distribution of crops from the farm, which is like a month's worth of all those storage crops like potatoes and winter squash. So they get to store them for the month. And then a week to 10 days worth of fresh crops like the arugulas and greens. And then a handful of storage goods like dry beans, dry herbs, tea blends, chili powders, things like that. So that my CSA is kind of unique in that as well, that it's not weekly or bi-weekly. It's actually just monthly. And some of that really speaks to the desire of the farmer well-being piece, really trying to create a lot more space for myself where I don't have to be on the farm. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Let's see, just make sure. So before we dive into kind of looking at what I found in the finances and the economic viability and the farmer well-being and things like that, I just want to say a couple of caveats. So, in terms of a study and research, it's not been clean at all. It's not controlled. There are like multiple factors every year, and you can see them in this finance chart that make it pretty impossible to actually compare one season to the next in a clean way. But I think that it's still useful information, and there's still some extrapolations that we can make. So let's start by talking about the economic viability. So this is kind of a chart that shows my seasons starting back in 2016, which is, not when I started the farm, but kind of when the farm hit its more max profitability. And when I was farming kind of these two plots that I'd been farming for 8 years or so before scaling back to just my home plot this year. So you can see that I was grossing about $40,000 to $45,000 a year for the last 8 years or so until I made the Winter CSA transition, and netting about $30,000. When I say that I'm looking at economic viability of the farm, I should say that I'm comparing it to myself. So my question is, can I match these gross sales in this new model, or can I come close to it by work and work far less hours? Recognizing that this is not like a sole livelihood viability, especially in a place like Sonoma County. Making $30,000 a year is not a right livelihood here, in my opinion. But as I've mentioned, I have a couple of other jobs off the farm, which we'll talk about in a moment. So in 2022, which was the full kind of, like I said, 2021 was a mini launch season. The winter of 2021 to 2022 was a mini launch with a 15-person CSA. These numbers reflect farmers market and CSA. 2022 was very unique in that it not only marked a transition to seeking out a full-size Winter CSA of my farm 50 members while continuing to do the farmers market, but I also collaborated with another farmer and essentially partnered with her, Raina from Yagi Sisters Farm. If you don't know her, check her out. She's a badass. She's running her own operation now. She and I partnered in 2022 and worked together. And at the same time in that year, I dug a well on my home farm property. And so I went from having half of the farm being dry farmed and going to farmers markets to having the entire farm irrigated, and then continuing to go to farmers market and shifting half the production to Winter CSA. So we grossed more that year than I had in the past. And then we split it between the two of us. 2023, the season we just wrapped up, I just had my last winter pickup last week for the 2023-2024 season. Again, another like complete shift and added variables. Back to farming by myself. Raina and I still are deeply collaborating, and she still works with me, but we're not partnering in the same way. I scaled down to just the home farm. So the farm went down to half the acreage. So I started thinking, okay, I'm in half the acreage. That means I need to kind of like look at this in a relative way. So can I gross half of what I was grossing before on double that acreage, if that makes sense? So if I was grossing 40 to 45 on 1.2 acres, can I gross 20 to 25 on 0.6 acres? And I scaled that down. I dropped the farmer's market and I just grew for the Winter CSA in a tiny little kind of farm stand wholesale situation that I had that was pretty negligible financially, but mostly just growing for the CSA. So you can see that I was actually able to gross almost half of what I've been grossing on the 1.2 acres, which was really exciting. I haven't actually, unfortunately, quite finished my taxes yet. And so I don't have the full net, but the net is looking more like $10,000 to $12,000 in net income on this land. So not quite meeting the halfway mark that I had been making from 2016 to 2021. Hopefully, I know it's like hard looking at other people's charts and hearing me throw out all these numbers. So hopefully there's like, you guys can understand it. And to some degree, I'll say I have all of this in a report that I created for WSARE that's like very reader friendly, that I'm going to link at the end in the chat. So if you guys are interested in like really looking at this chart and understanding it better than you can while I'm talking about it, know that I'll link those. I'll put those links in the chat and at the end of the presentation here. So one and then the last line on this chart, the last row, is kind of doing an extrapolation. So academically or like mathematically, I've calculated that I should be able to support a 60-person CSA on 0.6 acres. Now, I should also say my land is lowland, similarly to Sarah and Anna's. We are all winter farmers who have chosen very silly pieces of land to do winter farming on because we all flood in the winter and it's a bit ridiculous. But theoretically, I should be able to support a 60-person CSA on the 0.6 acres. This year I had 45 people. My goal was 50, so almost got up to that goal, had 45 people. If I did serve 60 people from that land, that would be more like 27,000, which would actually bring, so that scaled up extrapolation, that 27,000, were I to double it to make a comparison to my 2016 to 2021 years, would actually hit those gross sales really solidly and actually exceed them, which is exciting. Now, I have not had a 60-person CSA off that land. The cost would likely go up because I need to buy in more crops. So how that would really work out with the net income is still kind of TBD. But I think just interesting to kind of do that crop planning and that mapping and understand the possibility and know that it is quite viable to have a 50-person CSA on that land, which does get me up to those gross sales. So then the question is, how can I make sure I'm limiting my costs so that I make sure that I'm still able to kind of hit that net income mark. Now, the other thing I just want to say is that when you're considering a farm's holistic context, it's critical to balance the profit potential with the labor potential. And in the case that a farmer is being significantly impacted by the effects of climate change, you might give different weight to these factors, which is essentially where I am right now. So for instance, longer cultivation and harvest hours that inherently takes place in the hot summer months, growing things like lettuce in the summer, is more profitable, but that labor is a more critical factor to take into account than the potential profitability for me, if that makes sense. And part of that is because for instance, according to the USDA, in 2019, I'm going to also read a quote from USDA ERS here. In 2019, 96% of farm households derived some income from off-farm sources. On average, off-farm income contributed 82% of total income, or $101,000 for all family farms in 2019. So almost all farms need off-farm income. So if I want to keep farming, my realization is that I need to farm the best way I can for my personal health that makes at least a mild amount of economic sense, while freeing up more time to do off-farm work that actually can make sure that I can kind of live in an honorable way in the place that I'm from and where I live. So the hours that are freed up by focusing on lower labor crops can assist in facilitating that off-farm income, which can help offset the loss in profitability from these lower value crops. This to me feels particularly useful when considering that those off-farm hours are required in most cases, regardless of the crops that are being grown. Right. So even if I'm going to grow lettuce all summer, I'm still going to have off-farm income. So if I know that I'm going to have off-farm income, I want to farm in a way that actually works for my body and my life, which will take us to our next piece there. Well, we'll pop in and talk about market viability for a moment, and then we'll talk about quality of life. I just want to make sure I don't have anything else on that income piece that I wanted to pop in. I think I do not. So the second question in my research looking at winter CSAs is there even a market for it, right? Like I haven't CSA marketed in a long time in general. Are people going to be interested in California in a winter CSA? So just found it interesting to note in just from a research perspective that of around 41 farms that I found serving the greater Bay Area with CSAs, 39 provided main season CSAs, and only 25 of those offered winter CSAs. Of those 25, 3 of them were aggregators and not single farms. So, in terms of CSA customers that are in it, like really for the deep model of supporting a farm, I think that is potentially an interesting fact. To me, all of this indicated that there's a potential gap in the market to be filled for individuals who are already subscribing to the CSA model. So we have a loss of CSA model, or we have a loss of CSAs in the winter. Interestingly, just in some surveys that I did, which were, focused in Sonoma County and not terribly huge in their reach, I only had 42 responses. 76% of people surveyed said they were likely or very likely to join a winter CSA. And then my own personal experience, between the 2022 and 2023 season, we had a 60% return rate, which is favorable compared to the 45% average retention rate of CSAs across the country. So exciting to think that people are interested. There is a gap, and mostly Sarah and Anna and I, our two farms, serve the Sonoma County area. I have some people that come up from the Bay Area, which is made possible by the monthly model because it's not people coming up for every week. But there is in the broader Bay Area region, seems to be a gap that could be filled, and people seem kind of interested, and people seem once they experience it, people seem likely to come back, and to be excited about it, which I think is really important. So I do think that there's a market for it. I do think that it's a viable model from that perspective. And then let's take a look at quality of life and farmer well-being, because as I've said multiple times, this was kind of the big piece for me 15 years into my farming career, and feeling that exhaustion and that burnout and some of those health concerns. So important to note, this is kind of just this is a graph of the cumulative hours. This is from 2022. So both our team hours and then my hours, you can see they kind of mirror one another. But you can see where there are different kinds of dips, where they're low in those early winter months, January, February, in July, and then in October through December. So you can see where there's kind of the peaks and the valleys there. So I think just important to note, in 2022, I left the farm. I was able to leave the farm multiple times for 3-week intervals. I took multiple trips that year for the first time in 15 years. I think that it's important to note that increase in ability to leave the farm was in part due to having a business partner, but also because the work that was left to do when half of the farm team was gone was much more mellow than if the entire farm was in market crops for harvest every week, right? So there was a lot of maintenance that had to get done, but there was not a lot of kind of new or ongoing work that had to happen that required a lot of labor. Now in 2023, which is last year, I was farming by myself with Raina was farming with me part-time, so about 5 hours a week. Otherwise, it's just me. And in 2023, I spent, to me, this is amazing. Other people might not find this that mind-boggling, but in 2023, I spent 10 weeks physically away from the farm, which I don't even know. I mean, never has that happened. Now, I wasn't on vacation those 10 weeks all necessarily, and I was away working, doing some of my remote work in some cases, and doing some teaching and facilitation in other cases, and some vacation in some instances. But 10 weeks physically away from the farm, and had 10 hours a week of help on the farm while I was gone. And that was enough to keep the gophers at bay, to keep crops irrigated, and to do the little bit of weeding that needed to happen because of my particular farming system, which relies on a lot of straw and plastic mulch to reduce weed pressure, which is viable on 0.6 acres. So I think that like from a well-being perspective, that felt really important. I also tracked my well-being scores on a 1 to 4 basis throughout the season, just kind of like, how did life feel today? Was I happy? Did I hate farming? What was going on? And you can see there's some pretty harsh dips in September when we had some heat waves, and when the harvest was really intense. What I found is that days where I rated it as something like a 4 were the days I was away from the farm, the days that felt especially productive, days when there was someone working with me and we got a lot done, or when there were 2 people and it was more able, there was more space to rest, when the weather was cool, when the days were shorter from an hour perspective overall, like a normal 8-hour day versus a 12-hour day, and then CSA pickup days, which are just incredibly joyful and delightful. looking at trends for when days were rated 1 or 2. Those were the days with long hours. Those were farmers market days, because remember, these are scores from 2022 when I was still going to the farmers market, which is a great indicator to me how much I didn't want to be at farmers market anymore. Heat waves was a huge one. And when they were, and periods of time essentially after heat waves where, and I think this is a personal health thing, the sense of feeling of depletion persisted, you know, sometimes for a week or so after a heat wave, really much harder for me to bounce back after working through the heat than it used to be. So that kind of gives you an idea of, I mean, I think, and I will say, I think these scores are generous in general. Looking back, I'm like, that based on my notes, because I also took field notes, I'm like, the field notes compared to the numbers, I might have been a little generous with the numbers. In 2022, it'll be interesting to look at these scores for 2023 because I haven't aggregated that data yet, and see kind of how I was feeling then. But I think just great to know that that this model provides a lot more flexibility for me to be away from the farm, whether that's me resting or that's me working with off-farm income. I mean, important to know also a lot of the statistic around off-farm income for family farms across the country. It's often like not the same person who's doing the on-farm and off-farm income. I'm a single family household. That, you know, I'm providing all the income of my household of one. And so I have to provide both the on-farm and off-farm income, which is just important to note. Finally, you know, just looking into the future. So I'm continuing this research, you know, just tracked this last season and we'll track the 2024-2025 season. I have these you know, I have all of this data in a report that I'll share with you in a second. But I think, you know, because there are so many variables, it is really hard to, it can be really hard to figure out, you know, what is attributed to what. And so multi-year research is really important, I think. And it's also forced me to track things in ways you know, before doing this, I wasn't tracking my hours. And, you know, what I can say is that even that first season working with Raina as a business partner, we tracked our hours really carefully, and I was still working 50 hours a week, and it felt like the most space I had away from in my farming season in a decade. And so, which told me that I must have been working more like 60 or 70 hours a week in the years before that. And so, word of caution to all farmers that might be in the room to not do that to yourself. But just great to be able to actually look at those numbers and understand what I'm doing and be able to make better choices and in more holistic way, thinking about my own well-being and what I want my relationship to the farm and the land to look like in the future. I think that takes me back to, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to drop these links in the chat. So if folks are interested in taking a look, there's a Spanish language version and an English language version of the report that has those charts, and then more in the document itself. And so if you want to take a look and get kind of more details, you can. And then I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and Anna, and they're going to share more about Winter Sister, and then we'll have time for Q&A.
Great. Thank you for all of that detail, Katie. That was amazing. I'm going to share our screen. Okay. I don't. Well, we'll make do. Okay, so hi, I'm Anna. This is my sister Sarah, and we are a Winter Sister farm. And as Katie was saying, we're in Sebastopol, so we're like just a couple miles from Katie, maybe not even that far. So we're definitely both coming from a very similar context and community in Sonoma County, north of San Francisco. But our farm, while being a Winter CSA, is very different from Katie's. So I'm going to go over some of the basics of what our farm is like compared to hers, and then Sarah will talk about kind of the pros and cons and what we've learned in the last few years. So yeah, because we're in the middle of our third distribution season as a winter CSA. So we're a relatively young farm. We haven't been farming as long as Katie has. So yeah, we're halfway through our season. Our CSA goes from November to May. So we're really a winter spring farm, I guess I should say. I think that's one big distinction between us and Katie. And we have about 4.5 to 5 acres, depending on how you count it, in production. So a little bit larger scale and with tractor work, not just hand work. And our primary market, though, is a CSA with weekly pickups. This year we have about 145 members. And then we also sell some wholesale and some like minor direct to consumer farm stand sales. So our 4.5 to 5 acres are roughly distributed this way. The way I described the crops is maybe a little bit different than the way Katie did in terms of what is attributed to what season, but it's basically the same, the same flow that she was describing of storage crops being grown all summer long, grown and tended and weeded, but not harvested. And then, installing fall and winter crops that will harvest through the winter and spring. And then really crucial to our ability to have this model is our hoop houses. We use Farmer's Friend tunnels that grow the more delicate crops, which are really crucial to having weekly pickups for our members. Those are definitely the highest value and the biggest draw that people are looking for from us. And then we do have, because we go all the way into May, we do also do a little bit of planting at this time. So in terms of that kind of schedule of time that Katie was describing, where right now she's entering kind of a calm, just like greenhouse focused season. That's not exactly where we're at yet, because we're still harvesting weekly and we are planting out things for spring harvest. So we're kind of in still quite a busy season, although, Sarah will talk a little bit later about I think overall we do have a more level labor over the course of the year than a traditional summer focused market farm that's doing tomatoes and lettuces in the summer, like Katie was describing. And then we have a 1/2 acre U-pick garden with flowers and herbs as well. And our CSA program is, as I said, weekly pickups. We have a few box shares that we pack as farmers, and they just get the produce we give them. But the vast majority of our members come to the farm, and we set up kind of like farmers market style or grocery store style with all the vegetables set out, and they select their vegetables to take home. So it's a free choice model. And I think that's been our members really love that. And it's been part of what people have really appreciated from us, is being able to take what they want home and not being forced to take anything they're not going to eat, which is, I think, from the research I've seen, one of the big reasons people don't continue on with CSAs is when they're forced to take things that they don't want. So I have a photo of what a sample of our share can look like for a larger size. And yeah, we are operating November through May. And some basics about how what's going into being able to operate at this scale and to produce this food. Again, as a comparison to what Katie is doing. So yeah, we have a tractor and we do some tractor work, but we also are not highly mechanized at all. So we're not planting or weeding with tractors yet. I think eventually that could be very beneficial for labor savings, obviously. But right now we're planting and weeding by hand. And storage, as Katie was saying, is incredibly crucial to be able to pull off the winter CSA, because we, not this year, but last year, we pulled out 15,000 pounds of potatoes, and having a place to put those was incredibly important. And yeah, we have a 40-foot insulated shipping container that allows us to store both things like potatoes and roots, and as well as our winter squash, which is incredibly important because we we distribute winter squash for 6 months or more. And although, yeah, we could use more space, even with our 40-foot container, it's not enough, and we're looking to invest in more. And then again, the covered growing spaces, the hoop houses, is also incredibly important to being able to pull off this production for the tender greens. But again, we could use more space. It's a recurring theme. Having a root washer, mechanical root washer, is also really important. We rent space, or rent time rather, on our neighbors' root washers, but without that, it would be really difficult to pull off the quantity of roots that we distribute. And then labor-wise, it's oscillated a little bit over the few years that we've been operating, but this year we had 2 full-time people through the summer months, and now that we're in the winter and spring distribution season, we have about 3 people. So yeah, I'll turn it over to Sarah to talk about what we've learned through these last few years of winter farming, and what we think, what takeaways you guys could have. I can pull your notes on here.
Yeah. Okay, so I just spent a little time thinking kind of about what our goals were with choosing this farming model, and a little bit how they compare with Katie. And I think a difference is that we started this farm as a winter farm. So a lot of our learning is also just the learning of starting a farm. And we weren't coming into it quite from, like, we'd both been working for other farms, and we weren't coming with this direct comparison to what a summer model might look like. So our goals were like a lot similar in that we wanted a steadier workflow. There was this idea that there might be a way to farm that doesn't do this like a really intense summer and then really full rest winter, but that there's a steadier pace and a more even distribution of work, which just works for like my personality. And then, yeah, just really like noticing how much there was like all this fresh, abundant local food in the summer, and how it's harder to find in winter. Also, just starting a new farm, it felt really important for me to find a way to find a niche and not compete too much with other farms. We're in Sonoma County, which is just like, there's so many wonderful summer focused CSAs. So it was just nerve-wracking to start a farm. And then I also just love winter food. And so it's the food I most like growing. And I think Anna had also been working for a summer CSA that for several years, that there was just a clear, it felt like a clear market, people who really were really committed to the CSA model in the summer and probably would like sign up for a winter CSA. And so with the first goal, I think, we're going into our 4th season. So whatever 3 years worth of learning is worth. I think it is true that you can grow a lot of food with a smaller crew compared to like the summer focus, because a lot of it, we're kind of growing half of it at once. It's not that you're growing it all at the same time and harvesting all at the same time. And I think it worked well to have a pretty minimal crew and to do 150 member-ish CSA. We've pulled it off. I think the labor and the way the flow is and the evenness of it isn't, it's not perfect. And I think part of it is the newness of the farm, and part of it is just the fact that there are these moments when we do end up with a labor bottleneck. And that really is like May and September, October. I think, we've really modeled our CSA to match kind of other CSAs. That spring production is really hard, the April and May, especially May. And so we've kind of found a way to solve that a bit, is just to end our CSA a little earlier. We still go to mid-May, and May is still pretty intense because so much of our storage crops are getting planted then. But if we can get the right labor at the right time, it works. And then I think the fall, the big bulk harvest, like if we set ourselves up with this minimal crew to get through summer, and it works most of the time, but it doesn't work to get these like all the potatoes in at once, all the carrots in at once. And so we have this amazing resource in Sonoma County with the Great and Day Labor Center, and you can pretty easily with short notice get incredibly skilled labor, very efficient labor, and we can get a lot done quickly. And that has been, I think how it was this past season going forward is a great like way where we can like grow our crew really quickly for like a week to get stuff out of the ground. We, you know, the year before last, we missed a window of harvest, and we lost like pretty much all our carrots because we had so much rain that they were rotting in the ground. And just getting the timing right on things is really really crucial. And then there is definitely like continues to be learning around the like crop loss, getting the timing right on crops so that, you know, the broccoli is ready too early, and just nailing the timing of winter. I find it to be a dance with less wiggle room than summer. But the main thing that makes it viable is money, for sure. This is a little overview of what our finances have looked like the past few years. You can see we have two different share prices because we have a small and a large share. These are all kind of like averages. And there's a world of what viability looks like here. I think what we found is that our scale, this like 4 to 5 acres, can kind of support like 2 full-time incomes. And we are, for the most part, we have been trying to support like 2 full-time incomes without our own like off-farm like work that's happening. Although we both come from like economic privilege that has like enabled a lot of this. We own the land we're farming, so a lot of our expenses, like we pay ourselves the lease that is paying for a lot of our property costs, and we have just like a buffer of safety, I think, that has enabled us to like take a risk on this and to invest in some of the infrastructure that it has required to get this going. We've also started to transition where only one of us is working on the farm. So this past year, Anna worked off farm, and this coming season, I'm going to work off farm. But this is kind of like what it looks like. If we have 2 kind of full-time people, one of them is paid well, like an actual employee, and then one of them is paid less well as an owner. But then a part-time employee getting this extra help for bulk harvest in the fall is really important. The first season the very first season I didn't include here, we had like a very small 50-member CSA, and we operated at quite a loss. And then since then, you know, it's creeping up. We had to make a big, this 15K of infrastructure was basically our cooler, which we didn't have our first season, and then a lot of irrigation work. So it just is slowly building. Another thing that isn't reflected here is our operating loan. I think getting the cash flow to work with the Winter CSA, it's similar to many other farms that you're not going to get your income until quite a bit after you put in a lot of the production costs. But it has been important for us to both take some early signups to bridge the summer gap of income, but then this past year took out an operating loan through FarmLink that has really, like, for me, changed the game of like, we can actually fully cover our production costs and not worry about the specific timing of it. But it does mean that we're carrying some debt for the next few years going forward. And then this last column is just our plan for the year. It hasn't happened yet, but fingers crossed that it works out this way. Last row, sorry. And so we are raising our prices each year, and it has been important to, like, it ends up being quite an expensive CSA. To really focus on this kind of winter production and to pay labor through summer, it ends up being quite expensive, which we try to offset with like sliding scale, kind of a community support funds that we do through our CSA and taking EBT. But it just becomes clear that we do need to get a pretty good price for our CSA to make it work. And then the ability to fill this specific window. I think that, like, you know, we live in this climate where so much is possible. I do think, like, we picked land, but it's not amazing. It's low. We have heavy frost and high winds, and it's trickier than other land would be. But it does, yeah, it does work because we can offset a lot of that with just like kind of minimal infrastructure, our hoop houses and row cover and things like that. It has been really important to us to like work. I think the market that was available to us was really because we worked closely with specifically West County Community Farm, which is like a similarly modeled summer focused CSA farm next door to us. And a little bit with Beat Generation Farm, just like knowing that you're really working with other CSA farms to kind of like make the flow smooth for customers has been really important to us, and I think enabled us to kind of jump in pretty quickly and to kind of trust that the market would be there. I think April and May continues to be really hard. I think ideally for our land, it would be better to do like a November, April CSA, like November to April. Once things start bolting, and it would be easier if the CSA was ebbing. But we are trying to make this like really smooth flow for the customers. So it just requires tricky early plantings and things like that. And then I think also just on the climate level and well-being level, there's a lot of difficulty in summer farming and climate, and there's also a lot of difficulty in winter farming and climate. And it's also a learning curve, but there's so much weather craziness that the storm damage and the flooding, especially, this winter has been pretty kind to us. Last winter was rough, and when all of your income is coming from the winter, it means like those high tunnels become so important. And we had a big, this is just a picture of a messy day. But I also think it has been buffered a lot by the CSA model, and that when we have had a lot of damage, it actually hasn't meant a loss of income for us. It's meant a loss of time and emotional energy, but no one's asked for a refund. They've all been really like incredibly hung in there with us. So having that kind of market of people who really understand what they're signing up for, and we've just had unbelievably committed and lovely supportive CSA members, and I think that's been huge. If it had been like a loss of, if all of this that was in the hoops we had to sell, it wasn't as bad as it easily could have been. And then the last thing was just our other goal. I got the numbers wrong, but just grow the food we like eating, and and it's been so delightful in so many ways, and the food is so sweet and frost sweetened and amazing. But I think we need a few more years maybe to like decide whether it works or doesn't work, but I think it's on its way to working. Now I'll stop sharing so we could look at the chat questions, or if there are any other questions, or if Katie or Anna want to add anything.
Anna, do you have anything else to add?
I think just reiterating what Sarah was saying, and like bouncing off of how your whole research and your like motivation was coming from like burnout and stress reduction around summer, and just saying like, having 4 hoop houses and living through the atmospheric rivers, I would not call that stressful. Every time it's like a constant, me and the weather apps and the NOAA reports, we have a very different relationship. And there's definitely a cost there.
Yeah.
But we've also learned a lot on how to install a hoop that hopefully can withstand some wind. But we'll see how much wind they can fully take. But we've learned a lot since that photo that Sarah was showing. But there's definitely, it's not all easier by growing through this winter, because farming in the rain, in the muck, in the mud can be exhausting.
Totally. And I was making some notes while you were talking, that just to share with folks, like winter is so much less forgiving. Like you are making that point. It's like in the summer, if you have a CSA and a crop isn't doing well, there's all kinds of quick crops you can throw in to know that in like 3 or 4 weeks you can plug in. And in the winter, you're like, okay, like that didn't make it. There's a
Yeah.
little bit you can do in the hoop houses, but even that, you know, the timing is so unpredictable. Like 2 years ago, we planted stuff in the first week of October that we didn't end up harvesting till February. This week I did that and it was bolting before the December CSA. You know, it's like the weather is so, the extremes are almost make it, yeah, just less forgiving and less predictable. So it's definitely, yeah, that stress piece is not gone for sure.
Yeah, and it requires really finding the right varieties, and we have over the course of our few years trialed different things and figured out like, oh, that works, and there's still more to be done there. But it's like some of it is the weather changes, and some of it is like you really have to have the right kind of tail or collard or whatever. There's some that are not meant to survive these kinds, or just like they're summer varieties and they can handle the heat, but they cannot sit in water, have their roots be in water. And then others can really handle it. And finding those has been really important and crucial to being able to have food.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have 15 minutes left. Evan, who's behind the calf logo there, let us know if that's not true. But I think we have a little bit of time left for questions if there's anyone who wants to pop in with questions. I'm not totally sure how these webinars work. I can only see my co-presenters. I can't actually see
If anybody has any questions, just drop it there in the chat. We've got a nice word of acknowledgement. Thank you so much for sharing this model. You are truly inspirational. Not a question, but a very nice comment.
Thanks, Brianna. Yeah, we're definitely, or at least I can speak for myself, open book here. So now, especially if there are any new or young farmers in the room, please ask the brutal questions, because you'll get straight answers.
Definitely, yeah.
Can you share more about varieties that have done well?
I can. I do most of our seed buying and crop planting, so I can speak to that. One, I would say that adaptive seed and territorial seed companies they're both based in Oregon, and I think they are marketing to farmers that grow through the winter in a way that sometimes like Johnny's or other like East Coast seed companies don't quite. They have when they talk about winter farming, it just like means something different. So especially for like kales, like all of our kales are from adaptive and have outperformed ones from other seed companies because in their listings they'll say like this can last through a winter outside. So that's been really crucial. The specific varieties that we have right now are ones called North Star Polaris. It's like a white Russian kale. I can't remember some of the others, but Dazzling Blue, Dino, although that bolted early, but it was still pretty good. And then Johnny's is very useful for more like they'll be very clear about the storage capacity of different winter squash. So using their charts and looking at just like max storage on every crop, whether it's winter squash but also like any kind of root. So our although our longest storing squash is also from adaptive, so we use them for roots as well. Lower Salmon River is probably our longest storing squash. Yeah, it's just whenever you're looking at seed, just looking at like potatoes similarly, like looking at the ones that have the best storability. For us, that's probably Harvest Moon potatoes that have the best storability.
And then there are some crops that like handle the like crop families that seem to handle, at least that I've found, seem to handle those like wet feet better. Our flooding situation is different. I'm more in like a muddy situation. I don't necessarily have my farm fully going underwater, but like just finding that chicories and radicchios can they can handle actually drought, which I found out during my summer farming seasons, and they can also handle like pretty wet feet better than things like lettuces might. Beets handle, can handle growing in the mud. Leeks can handle growing in the mud. It's been nice too, because my field gets like wetter as you go further out. So it's been great over the last couple of years to experiment with things and be like, okay, how much further can I push things to get more production out of the field in the winter? Like I can push leeks and beets a little bit further back than I thought I could, and keep the chard and the collards like up in the drier part. Yeah. And I've learned from these folks, like, from Sarah and Anna, some of the varieties that they've shared with me that they grow, like autumn frost, winter squash. Lasts so well. Yeah.
It looks like someone else asked, is it possible without having hoop houses? They didn't seem to know if you had one, Katie.
Oh,
Which-
okay. Yeah, no, I have hoop houses also. I have three 50-foot tunnels. So, 2 16 by 50 and one like 14 by 50-foot tunnels. And then I also do low tunnels. So I have, so, that's quite a bit of growing space, relative to my scale under hoops. And then I have some low tunnels that, like, all of my chard is under low tunnels, and chard can handle the cold weather without tunnels, but with the plastic tunnels, it's like spring chard. I mean, I have the benefit of harvesting once a month, and so I have a lot of rebound time between my harvests. But I found that the low tunnels also make a difference, and I can grow things like radishes under low tunnels as well. It's also, I'm not in quite as windy a location as Sarah and Anna are, so low tunnels in their situation would be hard because the plastic is so much more apt to fly off. It's not secured necessarily as well as high tunnels are. So I think that if you don't have hoop house access, if you're not in a super windy place, low tunnels, it's like 10-foot, what's the pipe called? If anyone knows, throw it in there. Kind of that you can use, like a pipe bender, like Johnny says, a bender that you can use to make low tunnels, and then you can put plastic over those. Without that, it's tough. Without the things that I grow that are not under plastic in the winter are collards, beets, leeks, some other brassicas, because brassicas will just get aphidy if they're under plastic. But brassicas don't do that well. Like heading brassicas don't do that well on my land because it's so cold and so wet in the winter. Otherwise, celery, rutabagas.
Yeah,
What
I feel
else
like
do
it's
you
like
guys
a
grow?
market thing. Like you can certainly eat well without hoop houses. I think, yeah, it's really just the salad that I think for us is like really relies on it. And
Yeah, I think they're the high value crops that you grow in the hoop house, and so they kind of like justify the cost of the CSA, and allow, like, without that. Yeah, and we, like, recently, like, I'm in the middle of surveying our members for crop planning for next year, and loose salad mix is like, and carrots are the two #1 things that they want. And yeah, there's really no way to do a loose salad mix without them, other than like a chicory mix every so often. But I would say, yeah, just in terms of customer happiness, hoop houses are pretty necessary. Maybe in southern parts of California that have an even milder climate, that might not be true, but
yeah.
at least in our area, it's pretty necessary.
Or coastal. I mean, I farmed on the coast for a while. It's like the frost levels are so variable throughout California. So
Yeah.
here we need it for basic frost protection.
Yeah, someone also asked if either of you have tried saving seeds, and if so, how did that handle versus bought ones? I save seed in the garden space, for like flowers, especially because it's easier to do that. But a lot of stuff, there's going to be crossbreeding between brassicas or squash or things like that, where it's just you can't really save seed and have a true product. But
I
yeah,
save a couple of things. Yeah, I save not any of those kind of crops. I have a couple of dry bean varieties that I save, and I have some pepper varieties that I save. That's mostly it.
we saved some potatoes, seed potatoes, and we've saved some garlic and beans
And
and-
garlic, yeah.
But saving seed is a beautiful thing, but it's a bit tricky at farm scale to like find the time for it. And it's often just like much more cost effective to buy seed from a seed company than to spend the labor and the space, because you have to like grow something for longer for it to go to seed and fully do its cycle.
Amazing next step for all of us farmers, though. We'll aspire to save more seed, but very challenging. Any other questions?
I think there's this question, if you don't have hoop house access, some recommendations. I mean, I think there's like an educational component that like, yeah, there could be a very beautiful CSA that is like, we have, so many greens, kales and chard and chicories and all sorts of roots that don't require hoop houses at all. And it could be a beautiful CSA. I would totally eat that CSA, but I do think it would take a bit of education with your market. But I think there's so much food. It's not like a question of getting the food out of the ground. It's just the like people's desire for lettuce is very high.
Expectation for those cut. I mean, it's hilarious too, because as a summer farmer, I had very actively and very staunchly stopped growing any quick cut and come again crops like salad mix or arugula. I like came to loathe them, and I was like, no, not growing any baby greens. I'm only growing full-size greens. I'm only growing grown-up food. I don't grow baby food. I'm not doing this. I like came to loathe it because the labor was so intense and the perfection desire was so high. And now as a winter CSA farmer, it feels like those are like clutch crops. But I think you're totally right, Sarah. It's like reducing our plastic use on the farm is like really actually important. And so if people want to get behind all of those pieces of farming, it's hard, like putting that pressure on farmers alone, to try to succeed without the use of things like hoop houses and plastic isn't going to work. Like, but as a society, if we want to do more work on educating people on what it looks like if we actually start like taking those steps ecologically, like what that means and what that means for people's dietary changes. Yeah, I think that's give me all the chicories and the cooked greens. I'm the
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, people have to be willing to eat bitter salads.
Yeah.
But if they get some froth, they don't even have that.
This will be our next campaign. Arguing with people about what they don't understand about how delicious winter food is. Don't ever tell me you have too much winter squash. that's my thing in my CSA.
Gosh, the same here.
Yeah, there's definitely an education piece that goes with having winter CSA, where pretty much every single week there's a crop that we have to teach people about that they've never had before. They don't know what to do with it. But that also helps keep it fresh when like you don't have tomatoes and like the exciting crop that people already know and are excited about, to be able to be like, okay, well, we don't have tomatoes, but let me tell you about celiac. Is nice. But yeah, there's a lot of educating.
Yeah, definitely. 2 minutes left. Anything else from folks? Any last announcements from you?
No announcements here. I just want to give a big thank you to all three of you for coming out and sharing with us for this workshop. Really, I hope that folks will take these tips, these inspirations, and go start your own winter CSA. And I encourage you all to come check out the next workshops here at the Small Farm Conference. And we hope to see you all soon.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.